state your name for the record?
Of course. I'm Divya Lorian.
What do you do for a living, ma'am?
I'm a government security contractor with several different law enforcement agencies.
How'd you get involved in that line of work?
Well, I may not look the part, but I was an FBI agent for over 25 years. And then after I retired, I thought I could use my experience to keep helping law enforcement. So I started my own consulting company.
So, Ms. Lorian, what exactly do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, my job is just like what you'd expect any other FBI agent does. We try to teach our agents around the country about what we've learned throughout the years about investigating cases.
So how are you involved in this case?
Well, after Miss Bancroft was arrested as part of an undercover operation, I was brought in to review that operation as well as any and all evidence that was collected along the way.
Ms. Lorian, before we get to what you reviewed, let's give the jury a sense of your background.
All right.
Where'd you go to school?
Well, I got my bachelor's at Johns Hopkins University, and then after working for a couple of years as a field agent, I went back to school at the University of Virginia, where I got my law degree, and then after another couple of years, I went to Harvard for my master's in criminology.
Do you practice law?
No, I don't, but it's really invaluable to know how to interact with lawyers on a day-to-day basis. But my focus has mainly been on the logistics or the investigative side.
Well, have you conducted these types of reviews before?
I have, yes.
Who usually hires you?
Well, I'm normally hired by the government because I would have been helping them out on the investigative side. But every once in a while, I do get hired by the defense as well.
And have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have.
So, ma'am, let's get to what you did in this case.
All right.
What kinds of evidence did you review?
Well, since this was an undercover bribery operation, I focused on three main areas. First, how the investigation started. Second, how the officers documented it once it did start. And then finally, any and all financial records that were collected along the way.
Did you have enough information to correctly conduct that review?
I did. Through a public records request, I got all of the documents and the evidence that the police had had. And then I also reviewed Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde's affidavits.
So, Ms. Lorian, could you tell the jury where you started here?
Of course. So, like with any undercover investigation, we always start at the beginning. And that's what I did.
What'd you find?
I actually brought along a diagram for me to show you.
Well, ma'am, before we see that, could you tell us if you found anything in that investigative file you said you were going through?
Oh, of course. So one of the first documents I saw was actually an email sent from the chief of police to Officer Keenan.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's already in evidence as Exhibit 16?
You may.
Here you go, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Lorian, do you recognize what I just handed you?
Yes, this is that email I mentioned. It was sent from the chief of police to Officer Keenan, the undercover officer in today's case.
Could you tell the jury what the date on this email is?
Of course. So Officer Kimball sent this email on June 18th of 2013.
So when is that in relation to when that file you reviewed says Officer Keenan began her undercover operation?
Well, the file said that she began her operation on July 1st. And since this was sent on June 18th, it's about 2 weeks or so before.
Ms. Lorian, before this email, did you find any evidence in that file that Ms. Bancroft had ever done anything suspicious or illegal?
No, I didn't find anything like that.
Objection to lack of foundation, Your Honor, may be heard.
Yeah, go ahead.
This witness has not given us any of the principles or methods that she used in her investigation. I have on a good faith belief that they're trying to turn this witness in as an expert, and then lay that foundation before this witness starts delving into any conclusions that she may have made about this case.
May I respond?
You may.
Your Honor, Ms. Lorian just said that she consults with law enforcement, and she is an expert in investigative techniques. Now, she reviewed the investigative file, and she wasn't offering any opinion. All she said was that she didn't find any evidence of suspicious or illegal activity.
Overruled.
So, ma'am, You were saying, was there any evidence in that file of Ms. Bancroft's suspicious or illegal activities?
No, there wasn't.
So could you tell the jury what that chief of police said to Officer Keenan?
Of course. So, this email is actually pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty standard, except for the fact that the chief of police tells Officer Keenan to, quote, be newsworthy. And he says to, quote, do whatever it takes.
Now, Ms. Lorian, I want to talk about that second category you mentioned, the documentation.
Oh, all right.
What were you looking for there?
Well, like with any sting operation, we want to see that the police officers and the police department as a whole has documented the operation as it went along.
What'd you find?
Well, I actually brought along a diagram for me to show you.
Now, ma'am, before we see that diagram, could you just explain to the jury what it'll show?
Of course. So this diagram will show you the 4 operations that were conducted in this case. It tells you when they were conducted, who was there, and whether or not they were recorded.
Your Honor, may Ms. Lorian step down to use that diagram?
Yes. What's diagram marked as, counsel?
That can be defense X.
Defense,
We're not offering it into evidence.
oh, it's called defense A, just to start with.
That sounds good.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Lorian, could you tell the jury when that first undercover operation was? Of course. So like it says on here, the first operation was on March 2nd. Now this was the first time that Officer Keenan recruited Ms. Hyde as his personal informant. Could you tell the jury whether that meeting was taped? No, it wasn't recorded. So just to go over the people who were there, it was Officer Keenan and Ms. Hyde, and that meeting was not recorded.
And further, just for the record, the witness has appears to be a small card table with long names on it, or a piece of paper with names on them,
Yes.
and then small squares with either an X or a green check mark.
So the people who were at that meeting, like I said, were Officer Keenan and Ms. Hyde, and then that meeting was not taped. So I went ahead and marked it with an X. So when was that second meeting? Well, the second meeting was on March 31st. Now, this was the first time that Ms. Bancroft had ever been in the meeting. So the people who were at that one were Officer Keenan, Mr. Hyde, and Ms. Bancroft. Could you tell the jury if that meeting was recorded? This one was recorded, so I'll go ahead and mark that with a green check. What about the next undercover operation? Well, the third one was on April 13th. Now, this is the first time that both Ms. Bancroft and Mr. Covington had been at a meeting with Officer Keenan and Mr. Hyde. And was that one recorded? No, it wasn't.
Your Honor, I'd like to object to lack of personal knowledge that he heard.
Go ahead.
This witness is saying definitively that these conversations were not recorded. And she can only say, based on what she reviewed, there's no indication that they were recorded. She cannot say definitively that there was or was not a recording, because she did not know that.
Based on her review of the file.
Excuse me, Your Honor?
In other words, it's based solely on her review of the file.
Yes, Your Honor. It should be based on what she reviewed.
So, ma'am, was that April 13th meeting recorded? No, the meeting on April 13th wasn't recorded. So like I said, I'll mark that with an X. And when was that final undercover operation? Well, the final one was on April 16th. Now, this is a meeting when Officer Keenan first said that the exchange of money was supposed to take place. And the people who were at that one were Officer Keenan, Mr. Hyde, and Ms. Bancroft. Could you tell the jury whether you got a tape for that meeting? No, I didn't receive any tape. So I concluded that that one wasn't recorded either. I'll mark that with an X. Thank you, Ms. Lorian. You can retake your seat. Thank you. Now, Ms. Lorian, I want to talk about that third thing that you mentioned, financial records.
All right,
Could you tell the jury what you were looking for there?
of course. So, since Ms. Bancroft had already admitted to paying the bribe, We were looking to see if Ms. Bancroft was having any financial difficulties, or if the police had any evidence that she was.
What kinds of documents could tell you that?
Bank statements, mortgages, casino expense records, or expensive purchases that the defendant may have made. Anything that would tell us that this casino was going to be a make or break financial deal for Ms. Bancroft.
Ms. Lorien, in your experience, are those the types of documents law enforcement can usually get?
Of course, all we have to do is ask.
In this case, based on that investigative file, could you tell the jury whether there was any indication that the police asked for those documents?
From what I reviewed, I didn't see anything. There was only a single bank statement from a single account of Ms. Covington's. I didn't have any evidence that the police had even asked.
How about Ms. Bancroft? Did you find any evidence there?
No, nothing at all. Like I said, Ms. Covington's bank statement was the only thing we recovered. There was no evidence to show that Ms. Bancroft was even having any financial difficulties.
Thank you, Ms. Lorien. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
Your Honor, would you like me to leave this up?
Well, do you want it upstate?
They can take it down, Your Honor.
Of course.
Very well.
Madam Clerk?
Just a moment, please.
Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, may I retrieve Exhibit 16?
Yes, please. Why don't you go ahead and return that to the bench?
Of course.
And the defense 16, defense counsel. Mr. Wallach, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how you doing?
Not too bad. You were brought on to assess whether the Midland State Police Department followed proper guidelines in their investigation.
Yes, I was, so I reviewed all the documents they gave me.
You would agree that to come to your conclusions, it would be ideal to have as much information as possible.
Exactly. I needed as much information as I could get, which is why I reviewed the affidavits and exhibits.
Yes, but you did not interview Officer Keenan, did you?
No, I didn't. My job was to look at the documents, and that's exactly what I did.
But you would agree that being able to interview Officer Keenan could make your conclusions more accurate.
Well, not
Objection.
necessarily.
Lack of foundation.
Overruled.
Back to my question, do you agree that being able to interview Officer Keenan may make your conclusions more accurate?
No, not necessarily. When I reviewed his affidavit, I got his account of what exactly happened in all those meetings. So I had all the information that I needed. Plus, interviewing Officer Keenan could have introduced an element of bias within my information and within my analysis.
But you agree that Officer Keenan may have given you new information relative to the case?
Maybe, but Officer Keenan, like I said, would introduce a new type of bias, and that's just unreliable for my testimony.
And if he was able to give you new information, then that may make your conclusion more accurate.
No.
You're saying definitively that having new information from Officer Keenan would not make your conclusion more accurate.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Overruled.
So you are saying definitively that having new information from Officer Keenan would not make your conclusion more reliable.
No, not necessarily. Introducing an element of bias into my conclusion could have definitely impacted the results in a negative way as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Thorne. You also didn't interview Corey Hyde, did you?
No, I didn't, but I did review his affidavit.
And you didn't interview the defendant in today's case.
No, I didn't.
You did not interview Chase Covington.
No, I did not.
You didn't even ask to interview any four of those witnesses, did you?
Any four of what witnesses?
The defendant, Chase Covington, Corey Hyde, and Officer Keenan.
No, I didn't, but I did review the affidavits of Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde.
I didn't ask that you review their affidavit, that simply asked you to keep asking interview. Did
No,
you
I
or
didn't.
not? You discussed Officer Keenan's training on your correct examination, did you not?
No.
But in your report, you say that you cannot find any documentation from Officer Keenan.
Well, yes, in my report I included a very extensive section on Officer Keenan's training, and I couldn't find any documentation of that.
But you agree that just because you cannot find it does not mean that documentation does not exist.
Well, all of the documentation that I received from the Midland State Police Department didn't include any training or any documentation of such training from Officer Keenan.
But you only received your documentation from public record, correct?
Yes,
And you are aware that Officer Keenan is currently undercover.
yes,
So we agree that it is possible that due to Officer Keenan's undercover nature, her documentation will be kept private to you.
it's possible. However, all the information that I received didn't include anything about Officer Keenan's training.
So to be clear, yes, it is possible.
Sure.
You also looked into Officer Keenan's past history in the department.
Of the Midland State Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes, I did.
And you cannot find any history of past misconduct on the part of Officer Keenan in the department.
No, I didn't really receive any documents relating to Officer Keenan. That's why I didn't have any information about our investigation.
Back to my original question, you cannot find any history of past misconduct on the part of Officer Keenan in the department.
No, I didn't find any of those documents.
Now, you reviewed the affidavit of Officer Keenan, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
I'd like to talk to you about that affidavit.
All right.
Officer Keenan started investigating the Midlands Gambling Commission initially, isn't that right?
Yes, her investigation started in July of 2013.
But that change actually occurred a conversation between the defendant and Chase Covington in February 2015, correct?
I know her investigation shifted, but I guess that's the reason. I don't know why I wasn't there.
But you did read Officer Keenan's affidavit.
Yes, I did.
And in this affidavit, Officer Keenan overheard a conversation between the defendant and Chase Covington.
That's what she said, yes.
And in this conversation, the defendant said, and I wrote this down to make sure I got it exactly right. I saw the announcement about a new casino. I'm putting together a proposal, and I'd like to talk to you about it. So you know, grease the wheels.
Sure, you might have said something along those lines. I don't remember off the top of my head.
So you do not remember the details of the affidavit that you reviewed?
I do remember the details of the affidavit. However, I can't tell you every single word in the sentence.
All right, thank you, Ms. Lorraine. But do you remember whether or not Officer Keenan then began investigating the defendant because of that statement?
I remember that's what he said.
And because of that statement, Officer Keenan began investigating the defendant?
Sure.
No further questions.
Walbach? Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Loring, Mr. Baldock just asked you about something Officer Keenan said Ms. Bancroft said in her affidavit. Could you tell the jury whether that conversation was recorded?
No, I didn't receive any recording of a phone conversation or any
Objection
of...
to outside the scope of cross-examination, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Could you tell the jury whether that conversation was recorded?
No, it wasn't recorded. Or at least I didn't receive any recording from the Midland State Police Department.
Thank you, Ms. Loring. No further questions.
Thank you, Counselor. Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
May Ms. Loring step down?
Yes. Ms. Lorraine, thank you very much for your testimony.